Good afternoon. My name is Greg Niemeyer, and I'm so happy to see you here and welcome you all to a special lecture of our Letters and Sciences 25 course, which is co-sponsored by the Arts and Design at UC Berkeley program. And also in this particular case, this lecture is co-sponsored by the Berkeley Center for New Media. And I'm here to introduce Ken Ueno. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that the Berkeley Center for New Media is a wonderful organization for people who would like to do interdisciplinary work in the area of technology and society and culture, and try to bring these ideas from the different disciplines and methods from the disciplines together to illuminate media from diverse perspectives. Through critical thinking and making, BCNM cultivates technological fairness and equity in our classrooms, our communities, and on the internet. And just recently, BCNM issued a solidarity statement for the people of Iran and the movement to get everybody back online, and to commemorate Masha Amini, who has tragically passed away. BCNM offers certificates in new media for grad students and for undergrad students. And so if you're interested in doing that, just simply go to bcnm.berkeley.edu and see what's happening there. If you go there right now, you will see that BCNM is live streaming this event for audiences around the world. And in fact, the live streaming experience is how I first met Professor Ken Ueno, because we were serving on committees together. And I got interested in what you had to say in so many different ways. And I started looking you up online, and I found this amazing video of yours about your project in Hong Kong that you'll hopefully talk about. And so this talk is a direct result of meeting online and finding common ground and supporting each other. And so I'm really happy to have you here today, and to mention that you are Ken Ueno is a composer, vocalist, and sound artist, and of course a professor in music at UC Berkeley, where he holds the Jerry and Evelyn Hemmings Chambers Distinguished Professorship in Music. Ken Ueno is a recipient of both the Rome Prize and the Berlin Prize, and then soon you can say Ken Ueno, Rome, Berlin, New York, and like a fashion design, sometimes Rome, Berlin, New York, Paris, and so forth. You get all these city prizes, you get them all. So Rome and Berlin is a good start. So maybe Paris is next. I don't know. Yeah. Or anyways, Ken Ueno makes music with expanded techniques which go beyond the conventional registers of music. With these distinctly experimental methods, he contributes to the expansion of musical languages, and hopefully is able to give voice to things that haven't had voice before. And Ken Ueno's next show is opening at BAM in New York, called Everything Rises, and we'll hear more about that from him directly. So please help me welcome Ken Ueno. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Greg. It's a great honor to be talking to you today. This is one of my favorite rooms in the department. I've given a talk here before. One time, I even got to curate a film and talk about it, introduce it. It was a movie called Tokyo Ga, which was also important to me as a way to think about my favorite director, Ozu. I'd like to thank Professors Wymore and Niemeyer for inviting me to talk to you, and Evelyn Thorne and the rest of the Arts and Design and Creative Discovery team for their hard work in setting up today's talk. I'd also like to thank Gail DeKosnik, Lara Wolf, and Sophia Hussein of the Berkeley Center for New Media for partnering with Arts and Design to help make today's event a larger event. I am touched by your kindness, interest, and support. Thank you. My talk today is divided into several sections. What I do, how I came to do this, what more do I do, decolonizing music, spatializing ethnography, and towards a communality. First, I would like to start, though, by playing a short video of a recent work. We'll have a little bit more left. Okay, thank you. Breath is at the ontological center of my art practice as a vocalist, and taking a cue from our colleague and poet Robert Haas, his thesis that poetry is a physical structure of the actual breath of a given emotion, my practice transposes this notion into music through physical valence. I believe that physical gestures are indeed mapped to given emotions. When we hear the operatic tenor Pavarotti sing a high C and linger there for tens of seconds, he not only suspends his breath, but we too, as listeners, suspend our breath. Physiovalence directs our bodies to vivify in real time the suspension of our breath in parallel with the music to which we are listening. In my music, through circular breathing, that Pavarottian lingering moment is expanded to minutes, not seconds. The phenomenological reading of that expanded lingering exacerbates traditional modes of analysis in terms of structural hearing. For example, in Tard, the video of which you just watched, I hold my breath in a bowl of water for 2 minutes as an analog to how I have felt my breath has been suspended since November 2016, as well as how I feel my voice as a person of color has been muted. I am the hunger artist. I risk my life on stage as entertainment for a largely white audience, as a form of protest against the underlying premise of being of Asian descent in America invisibility. I am asking, how close to death do I need to come? What do I need to do for you to hear me? What do I need to do to not be invisible? As opposed to a piece of music constructed from traditional musical material, the Soma aesthetic focus on the body directly targets the locus of trauma, as Resmaa Menakem says, white body supremacy and the trauma that causes and perpetuates it lives primarily in the body, not the thinking brain. My piece foregrounds my body as a specific instrument. Much of my music is person-specific, wherein the intricacies of performance practice brought into focus in the technical achievements of a specific individual fused inextricably with that performer's aura. In an era in which we are increasingly rendered anonymous through digitization, person specificity stands against the normative business practice of neo-colonial transportability in classical music and says, no, you cannot replace people who look like me. What I call physiovalence is the sympathetic resonance in alignment with broadcast viscerality in performance as received and acted upon the audience. To operate, a work needs to be given an appropriate temporality of engagement with the audience long enough that the physical state and by extension the mental state of the audience might empathically align with the artwork's intent. If one does not consider the voice an instrument, then the megaphone is my main instrument. I started using the megaphone when I started performing in large spaces with complex architectural features, which afforded me the possibility of a counterpoint of resonances. Armed with a megaphone, I am mobile and I can incorporate the narrative possibility of movement in a space, direct my sound in different directions at different structural materials and angles. I can play with various lengths of echoes, and articulating the resonant frequencies of different locations in a space means that architecture too can be read as harmonic structure. I have developed an arsenal of vocal techniques specific to the megaphone, for example, a kind of slap tongue whose attack is followed by a multiphonic drone shaped by the changing of the vowels within my mouth, but the shapes are vowels that don't exist in any language. I've also learned to control the bandwidth of the multiphonic with the shape of my mouth, and I can also sing in counterpoint or in augmentation with a shaped feedback multiphonic by humming into my nasal cavity. There are other techniques which involve ingressive singing, which in alternation with exhale techniques allows me to circular breathe. I am patient zero of my practice, but the normative modality for vocal pedagogy in the United States presents the historical mannerisms of the vocal tradition of Western Europe as normal technique. In his seminal article, Improvisation After 1950, George Lewis illuminates how the process of exnomination impacted notions of improvisative musical practices in Western art music in the post-war era. Citing the media critic John Fiske, Lewis reminds us that exnomination is the means by which whiteness avoids being named and thus keeps itself out of the field of interrogation and therefore off the agenda for change. Exnomination also operates in music pedagogy in the United States in institutions of higher learning, where the values of Western classical music are so entrenched that those musical values are asserted unchallenged as universal norms for music and invisible ground. A particularly excessive sub-area is in the training of the voice, where the particularities of the performance practice of Western opera continues to be promulgated as the standard. The consequences are many: a reinforcement of neo-colonial hierarchies in musical values, the muting of non-Western sonic accents and traditions and bodies, as well as a potential harm to the body and psyche of the student singer. The physical molding or neo-colonial domestication of a non-Western singer's body into an instrument for bel canto singing is an example of what I call corseting. As I stand before you today, this is plan B in my life. I understand that many of you are in your first or second year here at Cal and might still yet to decide on your major, which might feel as some grandiose narrowing of possibilities for your future. It need not be, it often is not, let me assure you. I would like to tell you a little bit about my earlier life, my plan A, which I hope might be helpful for you. I was born in New York, but in my formative years, my family moved around. We lived in Japan and Switzerland before settling in Los Angeles. For most of my youth, I was told that I was American, but I didn't really know what that meant. But being a sensitive young person, I interpreted the sense of isolation, my sense of not belonging, as a deficiency that I needed to resolve. Not having any mentors, planning for college and beyond, I planned a life to resolve my insecurities about being American in dramatic fashion. My plan A was to matriculate at the United States Military Academy at West Point, serve my country, and return to California to become a senator. It's funny now, right? I worked hard and received a congressional nomination for West Point. I got in and subsequently survived the plebe year, which is still the hardest year of my life, knock on wood. Going into my second year, however, I suffered an injury during a training exercise and I had to leave West Point and convalesce for 2 years. Luckily, the year before I went to West Point, I discovered Jimi Hendrix. During my senior year in high school on a ski trip with my older brother, I woke up to find that he and his friends had ditched me. Being trapped in a cottage up in Mammoth, some of you might know, with no television and before any of these cell phones, I looked around to find something to occupy me for the rest of the day. Eventually, I found a turntable and a box of LPs. I spent the rest of the day listening to those records, Led Zeppelin, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and others until I happened upon Are You Experienced? After I happened upon Hendrix, it was the only album I played for the rest of the day. It was mind blowing. All True Loves and Transcendence. It's irrational. That music was so cool that I was impelled to start playing electric guitar. 2 years later, when I was convalescing, all I was doing for 2 years was going to physical therapy and playing guitar 8, 9 hours a day. Eventually, I got healthy enough to think about completing my education. And by that time, I had started to play in bands and write songs. And somehow I had the chutzpah to think about maybe I should do music. I knew I couldn't go to Juilliard since I played metal. And so I was also getting interested in learning to play jazz. And I did some more research and I found the Berklee College of Music in Boston, and decided to apply. When I got to Berklee, I took a history of music course, which is really the history of Western classical music, as is still the standard in many places. And I got to the 20th century. I heard Bela Bartok's Fourth String Quartet, which was my second epiphany. My body understood this music. It was like metal, visceral and powerful. It was in the pursuit, though, in analyzing, trying to reverse engineer what was in the score intellectually, structurally, that I became a composer. And after that, I tried to stay in graduate school for as long as I could. And that's how I got to here today. This is my plan B. Hendrix saved my life. His music is still important to me in several ways. I would now like to play a little excerpt from his performance of Wild Thing at the Monterey Pop Festival. This is just the introduction. Did you hear right before I stopped there that he strummed the open strings? And did you hear how out of tune he was? That said to me that if I were judging this piece in terms of classical performance, say for a chamber music competition, it would fail. Yet this is one of the most iconic moments in the history of rock. Hendrix invented a new kind of electric guitarism in which the main discourse of sound is not the fretted fundamental, but the feedback and the overtones, the frequency space. This material aspect of the sound, the viscerality of it, is still important to me and my music today. But additionally, whatever song of Hendrix I'm listening to, I'm not tracking how faithfully he is engaging with the original, as one does when listening to classical music. In contrast, every song of his becomes a vehicle through which I engage with Hendrix's aura as a fan. It is there that a non-transportable empathic space is created, and that space is a temple which every fan of every rock star or favorite artist holds sacred whenever we listen to our favorite artists. It is in the pursuit of that kind of specific engagement that my music is often person specific. Hendrix taught me that. And part of my mission is to transpose this person's specificity that is intrinsic to rock and jazz into classical music. That's me over there, green-faced during a summer training exercise at West Point. Now I'd like to return to my practice and how intersectional it is. I am uniquely situated as an interstice between engineers, technologists, artists, and scholars. I invent vocal techniques, as I mentioned before. Using software, I analyze my idiosyncratic vocalisms, which helps me not only orchestrate my voice with orchestra and contextualize it in installations, but also helps me theorize about my practice in scholarly articles. I code in MaxMSP, an object-based coding environment, creating algorithmically driven, ever-shifting soundscapes for my installations. I fabricate new instruments that prosthetically extend my voice. My practice creates new knowledge, which has been the subject of dissertations and books and articles. I'm also an author. My work, like Greg mentioned earlier, last fall in Hong Kong, Daedalus Drones, was an installation performance piece that instrumentalized architecture and was featured on the New Vision Arts Festival in Hong Kong. And this piece exemplifies how my practice brings together these various aspects. I create unique spaces for audiences and ensembles to inhabit with the added focus of myself as a vocalist utilizing bespoke techniques, often with a megaphone. Let me take you a little bit through my creative process for Daedalus Drones. I started with a vision. I had a dream that I was performing on a rooftop in Hong Kong, surrounded by an armada of drones, choreographically coordinated over time and around me. From there, I managed a team of designers, engineers, architects, and administrative staff to implement my vision. Here is a translation of my dream into an interior space, and then these fences started to appear. A critical point was when we were able to partner with the Asia Society Museum as the specific venue. And then I was able to fix my vision into an installation in the specific context of the Chantal Miller Gallery, these 4 rooms at the Asia Society. The red lines, this is my design, show the outline of a labyrinth fence. The green lines show where the custom speakers that are moving on rails will be, and the stars show the increasing narrativity of immersivity of drones as the audience moves from gallery 2, where they happen upon 3 drones, gallery 3, 5, and then it's like a hive in the last room. Further, working with architects, these are some elevations of the design of the labyrinth fence, more designs. This is the final floor plan, and here's a picture of the fabrication in Beijing and how it was installed in the galleries in Hong Kong. The performance event is further divided into 2 parts. One, an outdoor portion that served as an ostensible fanfare processional for the indoor main event. The outdoor portion consisted of 8 percussionists who were stationed along the rooftop of the Asia Society on the outside, as well as on the footbridge that leads upwards to the Chantal Miller Galleries, where the installation was housed, in order to articulate the outdoor acoustics, a kind of gambit leveraging, heighten the contrast between the outdoor and the intimate indoor setting. So this is, shows where the percussionists are located. And the Chantal Miller Galleries are the 4 rooms in the far right. The percussion prelude started with swathes of silence cut between percussive hits. This is no Cajun silence. It is the orchestration of epiphenomena, the cityscape and the cicada. For example, you can hear cityscape. Later on, you can hear percussion builds. Now let's turn to the indoor space. We have arrived at the dark place, the fence labyrinth. In the first gallery, the lights glow at different rates. The first two galleries, there's also 5 subwoofers playing frequencies lower than most home stereos can manage, between 31 and 28 hertz. The low sounds beat against each other at different rates, between 2, 4, 10, 14, 31, and 41 cents. And above, bespoke speakers on rails. You can also see some of the rails above. There's like a black box that's moving. There's the speakers. Those higher frequencies on those speakers on rails also beat at the same rates. And those beating rates relate to musical intervals that also connect to the bespoke microtonal pipes that the percussionists played outside. The frequencies on the speakers on the rails, though, were analyzed from a fast Fourier transform analysis of the tam-tams that are played in galleries 1 and 2 by 2 more percussionists during the performance. And it orchestrates and extends the sounds of the tam-tams into the physical space. It is in gallery 2 that the audience first experiences the drones. There are 3 there stationed to articulate the space around the audience. Successive rooms unveil 5 and then 41 drones in a narrative of increasing immersivity. The drones are chapters of a musical form. The galleries articulate. The narrative unfolds in space then, in time, as opposed to most concert experiences where the audience sits still. Okay. This is a clip from the last room. In my score, I indicated which drones fly, when, and how high. So it was orchestrated. The third gallery is where I waited for the audience. The aidless drones is built around my body and the sounds of my bespoke vocalisms. Here we can hear a little bit. What I'm doing here is shaping the resonant frequencies of the space as feedback with non-semantic vowels and circular breathing. The megaphone allows me to throw my sound in different directions, which creates a counterpoint of spatialization with the discrete sounds emanating from the drones that are surrounding the audience. When I place the small speaker with the sounds of the drones in my mouth, I'm performing a kind of electronic music technique called convolution, imbuing the frequency components of the recordings of the drones with the resonance of the different vowel shapes in my mouth. In this way, I become a vessel for the drone sounds in their desire towards the semantic. I'm the voice of protest. There was a period of research too, for many months in galleries. Before we installed, we conducted tests with the drones which were critical. We learned over several months that, for example, each minute the drones are turned on and sit idle, they lose 1% of operating power, a factor that I had to consider in my orchestration. And There were also networking and flight proximity issues that were also factored into the design of the piece. They're just technical flying things that we had to figure out. 2 months before installing in the Asia Society, we built a fence cage to test the drones. And this picture of it. During these tests, we realized that we also had to account for the Faraday cage effect, if you're engineers and you know about that, which meant that we had to purchase twice as many network hubs than we originally planned. We also had to adjust the placement of the network hubs in the galleries. In layman terms, with the fence filtered out the network. Right? Yeah. We also discovered a bug in the network and software, as the glitch only affected the drones when there was a certain number of drones being controlled together. The company did not deem it necessary to announce a glitch ahead of time. So this error cost us considerable amount of time to overcome. In imagining new contexts for technology, art can be a valuable partner to the tech industry. And creative adaptations of technology test the robustness of technology as well as invent new uses for it. Now I'd like to turn to some of the philosophical notions which has helped me ground and fortify my work. Earlier, I have talked to you about corseting and how hegemonic values operate invisibly and powerfully in classical music, and how my practice carves a space of resistance against it. When I think now of my earlier life, when I was planning my plan A, I realize now that powerful, invisible social forces made me feel inadequate. And my plan A was a naive prescription to try to address how I was made to feel inadequate. I felt that I needed to prove I was American because I wasn't American enough. Most of the most powerful ways in which culture and society polices its own values are ex nominative. Think of how standards of beauty operate in our society and globally. Those values are curated and signaled through the media, Hollywood, and advertising. But what if you don't look like that? How do you feel? How are you supposed to feel? What are you supposed to do? My plan B, a life of art making, has helped me become more comfortable being me. More than any training exercise or wearing of uniforms at West Point ever did. I imagine a thing, I do it. I feel my agency in the world expand. My practice helps me reframe the ontological center of me. I've survived. I didn't need to conform my practice to the limited historical frames peddled in American conservatories. Well, that's a lie. Actually, I'm a model minority. I had to, to showcase excellence in this traditional frame, no? But I have been given more agency now that I'm older. Last year, I was a Poetry and Census Fellow at the Arts Research Center, another one of the many fantastic resources we are lucky to have on our campus. In introducing one of our famous guest poets, though, my mouth slipped and I mispronounced their name. She quickly corrected me mid-utterance like a superhero leaping to catch a falling baby. In a second, I knew that she was recalling a lifetime of being mispronounced. I know that pain too well. At West Point, my last name was a compound which stood for both the setup and the punchline. We know, weenie, Wayno, Uino, Uno. So many creative ways to say the same thing. You don't belong here. In my art, I created a safe space where I belong. I let my imagination run wild, and I have collected the means to translate my wild ruminations into reality. The creative space is not just a doing, it's also a space for research, to reflect, find, and ultimately be armed with adjacent epistemologies. The ontological turn and Jack Halberstam's Low theory, which proposes anti-hegemonic practices to bring forth what Foucault calls subjugated knowledges, were powerful epistemologies that I found empowering. It was empowering for this outsider. Through reading Spivak, I learned that it is not enough to have representation. It is not enough to merely have a certain percentage of composers, artists, and professors hired to align with the numbers that superficially match them in society. That's just a start. The real work is to help create change in a system so that the diverse people can access their own position as narrators, as Spivak says. She says, my exercise may be called a scrupulous travesty in the interest of producing a counter-narrative that will make visible the foreclosure of the subject whose lack of access to the position of narrator is a condition of possibility of the consolidation of Kant's position. There are counterfactual affordances that could be beautiful too. Take, for example, what the Japanese author Tanizaki says. The Orient, quite conceivably, could have opened up a world of technology entirely its own. Take a trivial example near at hand. I wrote a magazine article recently comparing the writing brush with a fountain pen. And in the course of it, I remarked that if the device had been invented by the ancient Chinese or Japanese, it would surely have had a tufted end like our writing brush. The ink would not have been its bluish color, but rather black, something like India ink, and it would have been made to seep down from the handle into the brush. But more than that, our thought and literature might not be imitating the West as they are, but might have pushed forward into new regions quite their own. An insignificant little piece of writing equipment, when one thinks of it, has had a vast, almost boundless influence on our culture. I am working to create new realities after which we can not only question the values of the hegemonic spaces, but begin to feel the history of the dominant culture as counterfactual, as fiction. We can work to reverse the dominant narrative. The poet Natalie Diaz says, Americans prefer a magical red Indian or a shaman or a fake Indian in a red dress over a real native. Even a real native carrying the dangerous and heavy blues of a river in her body. What threatens white people is often dismissed as myth. I have never been true in America. America is my myth. In 2018, I was commissioned by the Telfair Museum in Savannah to create a site-specific work in these spaces. As the museum's PR mechanism worked, I found one day a message from a stranger in my Facebook account. Hi, Ken Ueno, how you be? I just received an inbox from friends. You're planning a component inhabiting event at the Kluski Embankment Stores Factors Walk on October 6th, 7th. I'm not sure that you are aware, but these are sacred grounds for the African-American Guli Geechee communities in Savannah because of the following. One, it was a slave-holding bin from 1749 to 1850s for enslaved Africans on their way to their slave auction block at Johnson Square, located 1 block away. 2, I am Gula Geechee and a slave reenactor. 3, forensic experts and historians are descending on this sacred space to validate it as a slaveholding bin for over 10 tribes that were sold by greedy African leaders and inhumane slave capturers for human purchases by planters from England who were granted land by England for cotton, rice, and indigo sales. We do not want the sacred space disrespected in any way. Therefore, it is my hope that as a fellow artist, you bring value to this sacred space. Therefore, it is important that I share with you these important factors. I, along with lots of Gula Geechee griots, will be there. We are guardians of this history and space. Till acknowledgement and truth comes, I look forward to meeting you. Know that the ghosts are those of my ancestors, enslaved Africans held for sale against their will. Excerpts from Slaves in the City. True Dat, Pat Gunn. Here's my response to Pat. Last March, when I conducted a site visit to the Telfair Museum for our upcoming show, being that it was my first trip to Savannah, we made a point of touring the city's antebellum sites by riding many of the tour buses that circumnavigate the city center. I especially enjoyed getting to experience the same historical site with different tour guides as they would spin the history of the city in different ways, adding different color and tidbits. What became obvious over several days of riding these buses, however, was that the history of cotton and slavery was redacted from their stories. Although many of the sites, like Factor's Walk, were involved in the cotton exchange. Part of our show, therefore, aims to reverse the redacted narrative of the city. With that in mind, as part of preparation for this piece, I went to the library in Duke University to look at the Savannah Cotton Trade Archives to get a sense of the scale of the economics of that city. It is the economy that still drives the narrative redaction too of the present city. My music sonically activates architecture, unlike traditional music where melody superimposes identity onto a space and masks the resonance of space. My music collaborates with and liberates the resonance of space as part of the music. It is more abstract than what many might expect of music. On the surface, at times, my music might sound like breath. My music is also aimed in different directions so that the resonance of a space may be heard. It also incorporates lots of silence. It is in the silences that we hear the resonance of a space. I believe that the resonant space, in that space, we not only hear the material of a space, but its history. My music is site-specific so that the architecture and history can become part of the dialogue with the audience. Silence is meditative and a gesture of respect for the people who have inhabited that space before us. As a person of color, I too have struggled to have my voice be heard. I have a lifetime of stories I can tell you about not being accepted as an American, physical violence, TSA searches, jokes. Being a published author with degrees from Harvard and Yale and a professor of UC Berkeley, being a native-born American to boot, were not enough credentials in English for a white choral director in San Francisco to tell me that I should have checked my libretto with a native speaker. My piece, Reverse Swastikas Mark the Place of Buddhist Temples, was censored by the Great Lakes Music Festival in Detroit because it included the word swastika. What my music aimed to do was try to reclaim the history of reverse swastikas as a millennium-old symbol for universal harmony in Buddhism. Such dialogue was not allowed on that occasion by the administrators. For Aaron and I hope as people representing our own marginalized histories, dialogue is part of our art practice. So we would like to invite you, Pat, to our town hall on October 7th from 2 to 4 p.m. The kinds of insights into the history of Savannah that you can share is important, and we would like to help give public space to have it be heard. Help us reverse the narrative of Savannah, and let's speak of the redacted history together. Thank you for listening. I look forward to meeting you in person. Ken Ueno. Dear Ken Ueno, I'm very honored to receive your letter, kindly forwarded to me by Rachel Reese of the Telfair Museum. I plan on thanking her for passing your letter to me. My sincere apologies if my inbox message to you recently appeared harsh or territorial. I was unaware of your work, your amazing music composition, and the content of how you were going to use a public site many African-American communities believe slaves dwelled on their way to the auction blocks. We view this site as a sad, sacred place where the ancestors journey in Savannah. Too many have romanticized and infused the slaves' journey and contributions to the economy's wealth in Savannah into their own stories as if they were invisible. However, in the mind, heart, and souls of thousands of families that carry the enslaved Africans' DNA in their veins on Savannah soil, we weep and work for an equitable balance of truth in this, the 21st century. Mr. Ueno, I accept your invitation to assist in reversing my ancestors' narrative in Savannah, Georgia. Composing is curating empathy. In my most recent works, I've been working to expand the notion of what research or artwork might be. I was moved by what the eminent Japanese architect Toyo Ito said after Fukushima. He said, architects tend to think of themselves as artists or inventors. They prioritize personal expression, but personal expression is not our most powerful tool for changing society. In the face of today's crises, the architect must become a negotiator. This means building a dialogue between all of the many people who use or inhabit architecture. Rather than designing structures, the architect should be designing this process of exchange and communication. By offering this kind of informal shared space, I'm trying to establish conditions that will increase meaningful interaction between residents and encourage the development of new relationships, not to reestablish the way of life that existed before the tsunami hit, but to create a new social life for the next generation that will be growing up in the aftermath of the catastrophe. Inspired in part by these words, I have been moved to think about shifting the role of an artist, composer, to that of a facilitator. My current creative project, supported by a grant from the National Park Service, is to make a documentary about the only senior role model I have as a Japanese American composer, Paul Chihara. This past May, with my crew, I took Paul to revisit Minidoka, the camp where he was incarcerated as a child. Being that he played violin as a child, I commissioned him to compose a solo violin piece reflecting on his experience as a child at Minidoka, and had the Grammy Award-winning violinist Jennifer Koh premiere his piece there. Here I'm in the former mess hall, filming Paul talking to the park ranger. And this is the score. I'm proud of its dedication as the commissioner, facilitator, and that's Paul listening to Jennifer play that piece, and that's in Minidoka. 3 weeks ago, I presented a performance and a lecture at the Korean Cultural Center in London. I was invited to talk about my practice, much like I am doing right now. Being that the conference fell on the weekend of Korean Thanksgiving, and knowing that one of the characteristic foods for Chuseok, or Korean Thanksgiving, are songpyeons, colorful dumplings shaped to evoke the crescent moon, I tasked my friend, the chef Reinhold Kegel, to create an edible creation that alludes to songpyeons, but that I could also make sound with. Okay? As a valedictory gesture for that day, I performed and then shared these creations with the audience. We performed together, and we will carry it with us physically and in truth onwards tomorrow and henceforth. Okay, so the green dumpling, that's a traditional songpyeon, and I'll show how that looks like a crescent moon. And those are the prototypes of the bespoke songpyeon as instruments. A real dumpling skin is too moist and won't travel very well, right? And because the secret is, in the inside, I had Reinhold fill these dumplings with pop rocks to make sound, right? And then I thought, oh, if you can't have the traditional dumpling cover, what if it's made out of marzipan? It's drier and more robust. And that's what he made for us. And the different colors are also different flavors. And this is how it was installed at the space, and how I also performed. And then we shared them, and then we made sound together, and I coached the audience on when and how to change the shape of the vowels, right? Without vocalizing, just changing like, right? But then let the pop rocks do the work. Some people were more into it than others.
O U
Just make the sucker sound and just open like ah, right? Brighter. Okay. During the pandemic, when all of our concerts were canceled, I was working on a piece for a friend when another friend forwarded me a link to a video about the Korean word uri. What I learned about uri is beautiful. Uri stands for the connected self, the boundary demarcating the self, indicating an extended, embraced, integrated, connected self where I and you are chunked together. It is a concept of I that is foreign to the Western sense of the isolated self. This revelation hit poignantly during the isolation of the pandemic for me. I am moved to embrace the lessons of these kinds of subjugated knowledges, like Uri and the different epistemologies of the South, as masterfully articulated by the theorist Santos, like Ubuntu, the Bantu ontological notion that centers communality, which says, I am because you are. I want to help rebrand the role of the composer as a negotiator, a communal facilitator, and I want to help the field of composition transform into a space to solve problems for the future, rather than a space of revivifying artisanal mannerisms from the exclusive past. Thank you. Try to cover some ground, maybe too much.
So we have some time for questions.
Sure,
and answers.
sure.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Ken, for this beautiful and thoughtful and very moving lecture. And I'm still resonating with your convolution moment there that you showed.
Oh,
It was so cool. And so if there's any questions, there's an usher who's going to bring microphones right there in the front row. There's yeah, there you go. Start there.
Right here. Okay, can you hear me? Thank you for being so complete, so complex. You connected with me right away when you said Bartok. My mother tried to introduce me to classical music, and the only music I really connected with was Bartok. My mother graduated from here with a major in music. And looking back, she was pissed that the Cal band would not let her in the band, even though she had prime qualifications because she was the band major in San Rafael High School. And this is part of the changes. I love how the changes you're going through. And I love that you're connected in some ways with the exhibit that's down on the ground floor in this building of Alison Knowles and her work with Fluxus. And John Cage was a part of that. I wondered, do you feel anything from John Cage? Did you learn anything from John Cage?
yes. I introduced John Cage to my classes as well. He often gets credit for introducing silence in classical music as a radical conceit. And he also gets credit for introducing all sounds, found objects, right? He famously said that as long as there's life, there's sound. A transformative experience was was to go into the anechoic chamber, a space purposely built to have no echo at Harvard. And then he heard several things. Of course, he heard his heartbeat, his breathing, there was also these high sounds. It's the nervous system, which is often so soft and masked by our own bodies and the environment that we normally don't hear it. So as long as one is alive, we also make sounds, and there's always sound around us, right? But the conceit, main proposition, the formalization of what is considered music in Western classical sensibilities, right? Foregrounds certain assumptions about what music might be, melody, harmony, and that there's a separation between the audience and performer, right? Specialization, and also that silence is a negation, a lack of music, as opposed to other cultural notions, like in Japan, there's a concept of ma in art, space, and also saori, beautiful noise, right? John Cage did not invent silence, but he was well read in Zen Buddhism and translated it, shall we say, to broader audiences in maybe the way that we can credit Elvis for having introduced rock and roll, R&B, to a larger demographic, right? And maybe Eminem, right, helped normalize hip hop to a larger audience. So I see John Cage as a translator in those realms. But everything is a double-edged sword, and we also have to hold him accountable for borderline racism when he says things like, "I have no use for jazz." You know? So of course there are important lessons, right, there, and also cautionary tales about translating different subjugated knowledges into different spaces. And he's been a very influential, maybe I might even argue that he's the most important composer of the 20th century, because he was not only influential in music, but in dance and all the other arts, and his impact is huge. Yeah, so thank you.
Is there a question in the middle up there?
Oh, Dion, hi. Yes.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for this wonderful, illuminating lecture. It's really complex and like a lot of inspiration for me. Thank you so much. I have two questions. The first one is kind of using a phrase from Aimé Césaire, Europe is indefensible. So my question is classical music defensible? And I'm asking that in the sense of, is the question to expand the language of what we call as classical music, or do away with the category altogether? And I'm thinking of that not just as naming, but also structurally, as like structural institution. So first, I'm curious about that, and second, I'm curious if you find the distinction between de-Westernization and decolonization as something important.
Say that again?
Distinction between de-Westernization and decolonization. I'm still grappling myself with this distinction, but it seems to me that decolonization offer like this totalizing perspective on huge structural material change that that often involves violence and not just on an epistemic level. So I'm wondering, because I think de-Westernization is important, but I was wondering, what do you think about it?
Those terms? Thank you. Those are very complex things and important things to consider. Let me try to tackle the first question. I might rephrase it, and I've asked people. I rephrase it in this way: is Western classical music redeemable? I'm not sure. What complicates it, right, is that in order to play violin the way, as masterfully as Jennifer Koh does, you have to start when you're 4, right? And practice 8 hours a day for 20 years. Your body changes. It's so unnatural. You hold the violin in your neck, right? And you twist it, and it's quite painful. Yeah, many violinists, right, suffer pain, continuous pain, even though they're, yeah. So I say, so the problem is, right? Part of the complexity there is that these people, right, are acculturated into Western classical music before they're old enough to be able to confess their faith, to borrow a term from baptism, right? Yeah, and by that time, right, when they're old enough, they're good, they're winning competitions, and then they're on a trajectory to Curtis and Yale, and then as soloists around the world, right? So, and then how do you know, do we all of a sudden take away their lives and their bodies too then? It's, no, there should be a space, right, that the Jennifer Coes of the world could showcase and be proud of their virtuosity. She's one of the greatest violinists in the world, right? Grammy winner, right? And she plays Bach, and right? She was just called by the BSO last night because a person got hurt to play the Bernstein Serenade next week. Just to walk in front of the Boston Symphony Orchestra to play a concerto, right? That's that level of that we should also on one hand be proud that we have representation there, but I want to also in dialogue with those affordance of representation bring back what to me is a space of redemption, what Spivak says, of creating a condition in which those people who have been marginalized also not only get represented, but also have the ability to reclaim their role as narrator, to be able to tell their own stories. So, week after next, I have a show at the Brooklyn Academy of Music with Devon Tynes and Jennifer Coe, an evening-long show in which I listen to them, a kind of ethnography, right, to platform in my libretto what they wanted to say about their anger and their traumas in their specific personal experiences with classical music. Right? Not only that, but we also interviewed Devon's grandmother and Jennifer's mother, another space of ethnography, right, that we converted and incorporated into the libretto about Alma, Devon's grandmother's experience with racialized trauma, history of lynchings, and how her grandmother was a slave and how she still had like these marks on her back, but how she, Alma, Devon's great-grandmother, right, founded a church, and how Devon and his brother and there's right, have gone up to Harvard and Juilliard and MIT, and Devon is one of the biggest stars in the opera world now, right? All right. And Jennifer's mother, her experience with violence as in the Korean War, right? She was a refugee from the north into the south, and what was startling was that some of the language between Alma, Devon's grandmother, and Jennifer Coe's mother, they would talk about trees and how limbs and bodies would hang from it, right? It's like strange fruit that these experiences have. And so that became kind of the tree and these hanging bodies became like a metaphor for the history of racialized violence, right? So presenting, platforming these things, giving them the space. It's an all BIPOC creative team, right? Our space to tell our stories as narrators, right? As a way also of creating a space of allyship between the African American experience and the Asian American experience too. So it's a complex regimen of things maybe we need to do as activists, create allies, and also think about in what way can we use art to platform our voices as narrators. I think that might be, I don't know yet, that might be the way that we can begin to reclaim that space, to help redeem classical music, right? We can't just play in the orchestra, I don't think, Sorry, your other question was about the difference between decolonization and, was it de-Westernization? Right. Oh, okay. That's really complex too, right? Okay. Well, yeah, one of the things I wrote about was going to Seoul, and in a particular alley, there was this woman who made potato pancakes, and it was amazing, right? Like handmade, and it really had this local flavor and artisanal, like, you know, real chef, right? And I thought about a potato is from Peru, right? What is it about the potato, then I conjectured, right, is able to be like a cultural zelig and transform, you know? Many countries around the world have their local version of what to do with a potato that helps articulate local food cuisine, right? Yeah. Whereas there are certain things, right, other materials, you can't, you know, transpose onto other things, you know? So then watching Michael Pollan's series where he says, right, stinky foods, right, define culture, right? We are the ones who eat this fermented stinky food. And I thought, oh, that also works for music. We're the ones who listen to this noise, this sound, too. And right, somewhere in there is a dialogue between intrinsic value of the material and how flexible a material, maybe music, maybe the orchestra isn't, but certain practices of composition and music, ideas about music making is more like a potato, right? And then there's still a lot of work to figure out what gives each of us, maybe artists from marginalized communities, the tools to best arm ourselves to express ourselves in our most earnest ways, you know. And I want to also acknowledge that for people like, you know, Jennifer and some colleagues who are composers, maybe that earnestness for them looks more like orchestra or our Bach chorale, right? And I shouldn't be the one to judge that, right? And so there's a kind of quotient for, you know, de-Westerning, taking that out, not saying, you know, those words or those practices versus finding a way that certain things can be authenticized more locally, right? But wow, it's like a huge, complex thing. And so that's maybe all I want to say right now, and maybe just invite us to continue this conversation ongoing because it's necessary, important, and complex. I'm certainly not the one to completely resolve it right now. I want to.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We are out of time.
Yes. Thank you.
Close the room, but I just want to acknowledge that there's a whole bunch of questions online.
Okay.
That came in. Is there time for one quick one? Do you have 1 minute?
Sure. Okay.
Okay, it's a very specific question that's online. It has to do with rethinking the legacy of tonality. And so this is from Alexander Douglas, and okay,
He's
all
a
right.
friend, yes.
So he's asking, how can we rethink the legacy of tonality from the totalizing vision of Raymond? I might pronounce things wrong. To the racist anthropology of Francois Joseph Fetus. Is there any hope for tonal, both diatonic and chromatic modes of thinking in music, not language, that truly curate empathy and move to something genuinely emancipatory?
Oh, sure. That's one of the biggest colonizing agents in music, right? Tonality and also the temperament, the way sound is tuned, and we think of something being in tune is affixed to the way the piano is tuned, but the piano is tuned out of tune to nature. That's the standard, right? The lingua franca, the English. And then, so maybe what I might propose is a space where the counterpoint of different musical affordances and the different ways that tuning and harmony might work, right? Like Dion's main instrument, the gamelan, is tuned radically different than the piano, right? In Japanese traditional music, gagaku, the harmony, the sho, the mouth organ, plays above the melody. You know, these are different conceptions than the Western assumption that there's a melody and then the harmony supports from below, and the way these things are tuned, right? What I'm going to propose then, as hope, right? As a person from an immigrant family, we speak multiple languages, right? Genre switching, multiple coding is normalized in our experience. And then maybe we can work to advocate for those multicultural affordances, right? Don't we all now want to eat steak and tacos and sushi? Or do you only want steak? I hope you don't just only want steak, you know? Some people do, and that's okay too. But at least now in America, everybody also understands that sushi and tacos also exist, and it might be great. Okay, so Alexander, I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Thanks. Right, thank you.